Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Troy Maris and I am pumped to have you here. In today's video, we're in Resolve 18, looking at my workflow for color managing my clips at the node level. All right, as is often the case within Resolve, as well as just life in general, there's many different ways to achieve one desired outcome, and color management is no different. I'll put a video on the screen here as well as in the description below on a video I did on project level color management. But today we're doing node-based color management. So it begs the question, what's the difference and why would you use one over the other? Project level color management is a really pretty interesting tool that we have that's somewhat new to Resolve, and the ultimate goal of it is at the broadest level, at the project settings, it's helping us transform our raw or log images into a more useful working space or maybe a display referred space like Rec 709, Rec 2020, whatever you decide. It's doing this transformation automatically with some input from the colorist, but a lot of the transform process is being done behind the scenes, and we're relinquishing a little bit of our control over our image to Resolve in doing so. Good and bad to both of this, but sometimes I find that the project I'm working on doesn't quite fit into the parameters of this broadest project level color management, and it causes some issues. So we can resolve that, We can resolve that issue by taking away color management at a project level and applying it with a little bit more precision on a node by node basis, and that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna look at some footage here on my timeline. I'm in Resolve 18.1. We're gonna go step by step through my process of color managing my footage from its raw state into its final image. All right, cool, let's go ahead and get our project set up. We'll do that by clicking the icon on the bottom right-hand corner for project settings and navigating to the color management tab. Working from top to bottom, we're gonna select our color science. In the project level color management, we chose Davinci YRGB Color Managed, but we're not doing that today. We're going to take that control back from Resolve and do it manually. So we're gonna choose Davinci YRGB. We will leave Use Separate Color Space and Gamma unchecked. For timeline color space, we're gonna choose Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. This is a really robust working color space for us to use. We can map all of our footage to this one unified timeline color space and work from there in a very broad color space. We're not choking our footage by converting it to Rec 709. We can do all of the grading and adjustments we want to make in a very large and broad color space. So Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate is on deck here, and then for output color space, we're going to choose Rec 709 Gamut 2.4. Set this based on the monitor that you are referencing or the monitor that you want to output for. So we're gonna choose Rec 709 Gamut 2.4 because that is still, as of today, the standard across the industry. That may be subject to change as monitors continue to get better, but for today's sake, Rec 709 Gamut 2.4. We're not doing any HDR grading today, so we don't need anything with the next three sections, but one thing to look at while we are still together here in the project settings, under lookup tables, head to the bottom, 3D lookup table interpolation. Switch that from trilinear to tetrahedral if you haven't done so already. This just has to do with the way that LUTs that we use get extrapolated and then assigned to our footage. Tetrahedral gives us just a few more data points to use when we're interpolating a LUT. So go ahead and select that, and then on the bottom right of that pop-up menu, click Save, and that'll bring us back to our project. If your project's like anything like mine, your timelines never contain footage all from the same camera. You've got A cams and B cams, you've got drone footage, there could be stock footage, there could be footage from another cinematographer, a part of the project. We have to figure out how to navigate all of this source footage and get it into one working space, and that working space is going to be Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate, like we set in our project settings. So let's take a look at how to go ahead and do that. Let's head over to the color page, and we're going to begin to organize our footage in groups. And we're going to do that in the light box on the top right-hand corner. You can select light box, and this will give you a bird's eye view of all of the clips that are on your timeline. And we're going to begin to group clips together based on similar log formats. So for example, we have some footage here shot on the Canon C70 that was shot in C-Log 2. We're going to select all of our C-Log 2 clips, and when we have them all selected, we will right click on the footage and scroll down to Add into New Group. This will pull up a pop-up window called Group Name, And you can enter the name that you want for these groups, and you guessed it, we're going to name it CLOG2 because that's what we shot this in. And we'll lather, rinse, repeat for all of the different source material that we have. So I'll come over here to these clips, and these clips are shot on the Canon R7, and that can't shoot CLOG2, that can only shoot CLOG3. So we'll select all of our R7 clips. Again, head down to add into new group, and enter group name, CLOG3. Again, I would go through and do this for all the different source material that I had on my project. This might seem tedious, but the difference between a professional and an amateur is all in the prep work. And this is where we can set ourselves apart as professionals by taking the time to prepare our canvas for the rest of the work that's to come. We'll exit out of Lightbox by clicking on that tab in the top right, and it'll bring us back to our color page. Now that we've assigned footage to specific groups, Resolve has given us a few more options as to how we want to manipulate that footage that is contained within those groups. And we can do this by going up to the top of the page. In the node window, you can see the clip icon with the drop-down arrow. Select that. We now have options for group pre-clip and group post-clip. If we select group pre-clip, that'll bring up a new blank node graph essentially. And what this is doing is this is going to assign this node, or whatever we put on this window, will happen to everything within that group before the clip level, hence group pre-clip. So what we can do now that we know everything in this one specific group, we'll say we're in CLOG2, we're in the CLOG2 group right now. Anything that I do to this node will be applied to all of my CLOG2 footage. So I'm going to head over to my effects tab and type in color space transform. I'm going to drag and drop that onto that first node. I'll give it a label, CST in. I like to keep my nodes labeled. We have a color space transform applied to this pre-clip node, but as you can tell, nothing has happened just yet. We need to head over to our effects tab and open up the color space transform parameters. Under color space transform, select the source that this footage that you have was shot on. Again, mine was shot on the Canon C70 in CLOG2. So I'm going to head over to input color space, Canon Cinema Gamut, and type in CLOG2. So we've set our input, now we have to set our output. What do we want to send out of this node into the rest of our workflow? And this is where we get to assign everything into that common working space, into Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. So for output color space, I'm going to select Davinci Wide Gamut. And for output gamma, we're going to select Davinci Intermediate. Perfect. Now there are a few more menus below color space transform in the effects panel, tone mapping and gamut mapping. At this stage of the game, during group pre-clip, I change both of these to none. I don't want Davinci choking any of my footage just yet. I'm going to do those in the post clip, which we'll get to in just a minute. Just know that in group pre-clip for the color space transform, I have tone mapping and gamut mapping selected as none. All right, so we've successfully taken our CLOG2 footage and now transformed it via this color space transform into Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. Now we would go through each one of our groups in the pre-group window and correctly map color space transform whatever that source material is into Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. So I would do that for my CLOG3 footage. I would do that for DJI's D-Log if I had drone footage on here. I would do that for any of the footage that was on my timeline. I would get transformed into Davinci Wide Gamut at the group pre-clip level. We've successfully mapped all of our footage from these different source materials into this new working space, but it still obviously looks very flat and desaturated and very much like a log image, which that's the case. It's just in DaVinci's version of log now. So we want to help ourselves out now, and we want to convert our footage closer to the end of our timeline into Rec 709. We're going to do that by going back up to the top of our node window, and we're going to select the drop-down arrow and choose Group Post Clip. Depending on the type of project that you're doing, you could do this next step in Group Post Clip, or you could do it at the timeline level. If you do these next steps at the timeline level, everything on your timeline, be that graphics, be that stock footage, what have you, is going to be affected by what you do. I like to do this next step at the group post clip levels. That way I can still add, let's say I have stock footage that I have that's already in Rec 709 and I don't want to convert it into DaVinci and then back into Rec 709. Maybe I want to use graphics or plugins or logos or images. I don't want those extra peripheral things affected by what I'm about to do. So I like to take this next step and do it in group post clip and leave my timeline settings free for the time being. So we're in group post clip. We're towards the end of our color pipeline, and this is where we're going to actually transform our footage from DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate into Rec 709. And there's a really important reason we do this in post clip and we do this towards the end of our timeline. Because when we make this transformation to Rec 709, we're taking all of our data and all of the information that our camera captured and we're funneling it pretty drastically into a much smaller color space that is Rec 709. C-Log 2 is much larger, DaVinci Wide Gamut's much larger than Rec 709. So something has to give in that funneling process. And from that choke point on, you're only left with Rec 709 data. So the fact that we have successfully pushed off that transformation until the very end of our pipeline is great, because that means that all of the adjustments and manipulation that we do at the group pre-clip level, as well as most importantly the clip level and any nodes before our color space transform here in the post-clip level, are all going to be happening with the maximum amount of data that's available from our source camera. We haven't done any choking at this stage of the game. It gets pinched towards the end. All right, hopefully that makes sense. If not, let me know in the comments below and I'd be happy to break that down even a little bit further, but we'll move on from there. In group post clip, all right, we're going to again add ourselves a color space transform to this node. We'll label it CST out. And we're going to head over to the effects panel, input color space. So if you remember, we've sent DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate out at the pre-clip level, which means the input here in this next node later on in the timeline is going to be DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate. And then I get to choose what my output color space is going to be. And like I said at the beginning, we're going to output this to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. All right, check that out. Now we have an image that looks a little bit more like we shot it. This is a technical transformation into Rec 709. This could be where your color grading stops for your project, where you've successfully normalized this image, and if that's all the project calls for, then great. But we're cinematographers, we're colorists, we are just here to make banger vids, right? Make the coolest images that we can. There's a lot that we can do to these clips to enhance them, make them better, and add a little bit of character to them. So that's what we're going to do next. All right, we have done a lot of work to our image from its initial in-camera state to Rec 709. Now, it's starting to look pretty good. We're getting there. We've made good progress. And all of this work that we've done this far, that is preparation. That is what I mentioned earlier when I said that the preparation is what will separate an amateur from a professional. Building yourself a foundation, maybe it's not exactly like this, adjust this workflow to better fit the way that you like to work and what makes sense in your head. But this is the type of stuff that will help take you to the next level, rather than jumping right in and starting to spin knobs and adjust dials and make custom curves. Start here at the foundation, which we've done. Let's move on. Okay, so I'm still here in my group post-clip node window. I've got the one color space transform out node. I'm going to apply one more node before that one for my look development. I'm going to hit Shift S on my keyboard. Yours may or may not be the same, depending on how you have yours set up. I'm going to label that LUT. I'm applying a LUT before my color space transform, so I'm still in DaVinci Wide Gamut color space, and I still have all of that data to work with. but I'm going to apply that LUT to all of the footage that's in this group. Now this is where I'm going to use a LUT that I've got from Colin Kelly. I've adapted the way that he works. He is by far a better colorist than I. This is just how I've taken what I've learned from him and adapted it. And he likes to work in Davinci Wide Gamut, and he has designed and built LUTs specifically for Davinci Wide Gamut. That means that LUT is expecting Davinci Wide Gamut in, and it's going to give us Davinci Wide Gamut out. That's really important. We can't just throw any old LUT on here without properly transforming our footage into the color space that it's expecting and adjusting from there. So that's where I'm going to use this LUT from Colin Kelly. So I'll head over to my LUTs folder, and I really like his LUT Huntress, and apply that to my node. So I've used my LUT. That's everything I'm going to do in the group post clip window. I'm going to move myself back now to my clip window via the drop down arrow. And this is where I'm going to begin to go through all of my footage and finally begin to make clip level adjustments. Now, because of the way that we have set up our pipeline, all of our footage at the clip level is going to be in Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate. So all of our tools are going to be color space aware as we would expect them to be, and they're all going to work identically. An offset adjustment for C-Log2 is going to match an offset adjustment for C-Log3, for S-Log3, what have you, because they've all been mapped into the same color space. And uniformity is great when it comes to this. The node graph that I build at the clip level is probably going to seem shockingly simple. Occam's razor. With all else being equal, the simplest solution is oftentimes the best solution. And I wholeheartedly believe that and apply that to color grading. When it comes to minimalism, I apply that. I just try to make things as simple as possible and not get bogged down in the weeds too much, because my personality, I am the one that would spend an hour on one shot playing around with different adjustments and sliders and curves. So to combat that, I try to streamline things to make things more efficient, more effective, and systematized, if you will. My node graph at the clip level is going to include 3 different nodes. The first node is for exposure. Second node is set aside for color balancing, and the third is for contrast ratio, all labeled accordingly. Now I'm going to copy and paste that node tree to all of my different clips on my timeline, because they're all going to be handled the exact same. And then I'll begin to make these clip level adjustments in passes as I go through my footage. So the first pass that I'm going to do, I'm going to be in node 1, that exposure node, and I'm going to take a look at my clip using my primary wheels. Again, I find the primaries are the simplest way to go about adjusting exposure, and with all else being equal, we're going to choose the simplest option. So I'm going to just touch my offset wheel in this exposure node. I'll slide that up or down to get an exposure that is going to be where I want it to be. Now, there really isn't a correct answer necessarily for where your exposure should be. It's what looks good to you, what looks good for the image. I do like to keep an eye on my scopes, but the scopes are a tool. The scopes don't get to dictate where your image lies from an exposure or color balance perspective. They're just there to guide you and maybe help you out of a pinch if things are getting a little wild and you need an extra set of hands, an extra set of eyes on your image. Reference the scopes, but again, don't let them dictate how you do your grade. Do what feels right to you. So I like to adjust my exposure by eye first, get it to where I think I want it to be, maybe reference my scopes. We're not going to stay on any one clip for too long. We're trying to get through our exposure pass relatively quickly. We're making one simple adjustment, and that's to the exposure. So we'll move on to our next clip, and again, adjusting our exposure as we would like. We'll move on to the next clip, adjusting our offset, getting our exposure where it belongs, and so on and so forth. Get all the way through your clips on your timeline in your project, doing exposure adjustments. Then we'll come back to the first clip and we're going to begin the second pass. And that's where we'll move over to our second node, and that's color balance. And believe it or not, I'm going right back to my offset wheel within my primaries for color balancing. This is the importance of having a calibrated monitor, so that way you can trust what your eye is seeing, so that way you can find where the balance needs to be to make the image look right. But again, using a vector scope is a very good tool that can help aid in this process. I often like to try to add as much color contrast to my images as I reasonably can. So I want to see the data in my vector scope spanning across ideally 2 different vectors, letting me know that I have good color separation within the image. If there's a part of my image I really want to be able to analyze and take a look at, let's say there's a true black or a true white, or maybe something that I want to be a neutral gray in my image, I can head over to my scopes drop-down menu and I can turn on display qualifier focus and make sure that I have my qualifier selected in my project window. And wherever I hover that, I'll see an indicator in my vector scope. This also works for the waveform as well, the parade, what have you. You can see exactly where that point renders in the scopes. We'll head over to the next clip. Again, we're working in passes. We're in that second node now, our color balancing node. I'm reaching for that offset wheel, and I'm going to move that ball around until I get the color balance that is going to be right for the image. I'll continue to work through the rest of my timeline doing this color balancing pass. We'll bring it back one more time for our third pass now, and this is where we're looking specifically at contrast ratios. Our overarching contrast should already be set and dictated by that look development node that we have in our group post clip. If we find ourselves adding contrast to every image on our timeline, that means we probably should have added more contrast in that one single node at the group level, so that way it was uniformly done throughout. We're going to go back through here and just make sure that our highlights and shadows are within range or where we want to see them in adjusting the contrast. Just because we're doing this pass doesn't mean that you need to add or subtract contrast. Just make the pass, look at the image, decide what it's going to need. It might not need anything, and if so, great, move on to the next one. Lather, rinse, repeat until you get all the way through your timeline. That is 95% of my color grading workflow. Anything that we do beyond this, while it could make the image better, and you can make an argument all day long that we could make these images better, we're likely going to see a diminishing return on the results. We could go in there, add keys, we could pull masks, we could do a bunch of other really fancy things that Resolve has to offer for us, but I would make an argument that the returns that you get on your time are going to be diminishing. So if you have the time to continue to experiment and play around and just craft a slightly better image, by all means, go ahead. If you're on a time frame, if you're working under a budget, if you've got other things that you need to be doing, this could be a good place to stop color grading and finish out your project. So I'll leave that decision up to you. If it were me, I might go back through and I might add in maybe a couple linear masks if I wanted to reshape the light for a specific scene. I might head over to my timeline level and add in some noise or some grain and play around with some of those. But that's just me playing around a little bit. I don't think there's anything more I'm going to do to these images that are going to dramatically affect what the final result looks like. We're there. So congratulations. Thanks for playing along. If you have any other questions about what we went over here today, make sure you head down to the comments. Let me know what that question might be. I'll do the best I can to get that answered for you. I love the back and forth we have down there. I very much look forward to it. So I will see you there in the comments on your way down. Make sure you hit like, hit subscribe, do all the YouTube things, and I will see you in the next video.